Well, welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm the RV Wingman. Glad you're here. Today, we're going to be diving into something that many RV buyers have experienced, but few are willing to discuss. And that's dealers pulling shenanigans to change a deal after the buyer thought that everything was set in stone. Has that ever happened to you? Maybe you walked away thinking, man, I got a deal, only to find out a short time later that the paperwork wasn't quite right. Not quite what you agreed to, or at least that's what the dealer claimed. Or maybe you were asked to bring your documents back in, only to end up with something completely different. If you've got a story, I want to hear it. And if you're someone who feels that you've been taken advantage of by a bad dealer or a bad manufacturer, don't remain silent. I have teamed up with some of the best RV lemon lawyers in the country, including my friends at the Burdge Law Office, and I'd love to help. Shoot me an email at rvwingman@gmail.com or give me a call 24/7 on my voicemail at 1-330-WINGMAN. That's 1-330-946-4626. There are no fees, no strings attached, just honest advice and my willingness to listen. So right now, let's jump into this interview with the founder of the Burdge Law Office, my friend Ron Burdge, for some real eye-opening insights about what happens when deals go sideways and things start to smell fishy. First off, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch the interview that I did with Greg, because to me, somebody that doesn't know the law, it was just riddled with different kinds of little things, nuances that I thought were worth your review and discussing. So, we've got a link to that video down below if somebody didn't catch the entire interview. But let's recap a little bit. This gentleman went in, bought an RV at an RV show. He assumed, and he didn't want the demo that was being presented. He was told he was going to get a different RV, and then things began to change. Where do you want to pick this story up, Ron?
You can pick it up almost anywhere and see things that are going wrong legally and what's happening. Buying an RV at an RV show is always a bit of a risk because 9 times out of 10, what they want to get rid of is not the one sitting back at the dealership, but the one sitting right there in front of them, because they know when they take that back, they've got to mark it as one that's been to the show. And that means everybody and their brother has been in and out, or as in this case, bouncing around in the bathroom. And so it's going to have some wear and tear and some problems that may exist that otherwise it wouldn't have. But it's always a good idea to go shopping at the show, I think. That's not a bad idea. But actually making a deal to buy one, you got to be really careful to make sure that it doesn't go south on you like this one did here.
But he had an agreement. This
Yeah.
gentleman, Greg, had an agreement with Camping World that, look, I love that RV, but I don't love that one. They said, no problem. You're not going to get this demo. You're going to get another one. Isn't that misrepresentation?
Yeah. That's called lying in the old days that we grew up,
Yeah.
Yeah, the bottom line of it is he specifically said he didn't want that RV, and they decided that, well, they're going to get it to him anyway, without him realizing what was going on in the back room, so to speak. And yeah, that is unfair act. That's deception. That's also outright fraud, since it's an outright lie. And the bottom line of it is they got his money by the effect of the lie and the misrepresentations that were being made. It sounds like he did what he could to cover himself, except for one angle, and that is he didn't walk away from there with the document that showed which one he actually had bought. In fact, he made a comment that they appear to have had it and then it just disappeared. Well, that doesn't surprise me that it disappeared. The only other advice I would give somebody who's thinking about that is basically before you ever go shopping or even just looking, not shopping, but just looking, do your online research. Research everything about the vehicles you're thinking about, kind of narrow your list, and then stick to it. Don't let anybody sway you into, well, look at this one we got over here. It's a better deal. That better deal is almost always a worse deal for you as a practical matter. And the other thing is, know your dealer. Go to a dealer after you've already checked them all out. Don't just pick a dealer who happens to be nearby, but check everything you can on the internet about them. There are RV dealer reviews. Some of them are a bit of a rigged game, so to speak, but there are some reviews out there that you can dig up. And look at the Better Business ratings too. not because they're real in terms of having some legitimacy, although they have some,
Mm-hmm.
but look at the complaints that people have filed with the Better Business Bureau. It's not a matter of whether they resolved the complaints, it's a matter of whether there were complaints. Because if a dealer's got 4, 5, 6, 8 complaints by somebody who went there to buy something, well, there's something wrong. Even if they fix it for that particular buyer, there's something wrong going on there that maybe ought to alert you to not go to that dealer.
Now let me bring this up. Let's go back to when Greg had purchased and signed an agreement there at the RV show.
Yeah.
From what I understood, is it was in writing that he was not going to take that unit. They gave him paperwork, and then they called him subsequent to the RV show, after the RV show, and said, "Hey, there's a mess up on your paperwork. We need you to bring it back in." And isn't that a red flag when that happens? And because he says that he brought his paperwork back in, and then all of a sudden they replaced it, and then that document saying that no, 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 I'm not going to buy that one, just disappeared. Talk to us about that, about switching documents, and there's probably a term for that.
Oh, there is. The industry has a special term for doing that to somebody. And there's two different terms that are used for it. The old school term, so to speak, was the comeback. And that's where they do everything. They deliver it to you, you sign the paperwork. Sometimes they don't deliver it because they're going to do something, but they get all the signatures done. They tell you it's a done deal, financing is set up and everything else. And
Mm-hmm.
that reminds me, in this case, there was something he had to redo because the bank said they weren't going to do it anymore. Well, that's a bunch of malarkey. The reason is because any dealer worth their salt knows when they got a deal. Now, they may not tell you that that's what's going on, or they may tell you there's one and then try to change it later. And that's part of what it sounds like happened here, the comeback. And that's where you go out the door thinking you got a deal, and then after a day or two or three, they call you back and say something was wrong. Paperwork made a mistake, or the bank wants more money down, or come on back in, we got to change something, the paperwork was wrong, or whatever. One excuse after another. It's a comeback. They want you to come back, and they want you to come back because they're up to something. Now, there's a newer term. The newer term for the same thing is called the yo-yo. Remember when we were kids, you had that yo-yo, you just swing it
Mm-hmm.
down, swing it up and such. Okay, that's what they're doing to the buyer. They swing him out, make him think he's got it, then they suck him right back in and do a whole new deal on it. And they make it sound like it's an innocent mistake, when in reality, it's not an innocent mistake at all.
Okay, so when that happens, and it's too late for Greg, but for many people, when that comeback, the yo-yo happens. Hey, bring your paperwork back in. We're going to make the deal right. Everything's fine. They're going to make some adjustments. Are you suggesting don't give up the original paperwork? I left it at home, or also get them to make a written reason. Hey, Mr. Warren, we need to redo your paperwork because of such and such. Get it in writing and not just trust them?
Oh, not just trust him. Oh, heavens no. Never trust him. Remember, what their fundamental goal is to get into your wallet. So
Yeah.
what you got to do is watch out. So I'm suggesting actually two things. Number one, if you have signed paperwork and you like the paperwork, don't go back. You got a deal. If you have signed paperwork, you got a deal. Whatever excuse they've got for changing the deal doesn't amount to a hill of beans legally, but it makes you feel like, well, it's an innocent mistake. And
Mm.
in 9 times out of 10, there's no innocence to this mistake, so to speak. It's not even a mistake. So I'd suggest, first of all, think real hard about whether or not you want to go back. Because when you go back, it's very tough to say no face to face. It's real easy to say it when they're on the phone and you just say, nope, not going to do that. And the other thing is, if you do go back, for goodness sakes, leave all of your paperwork at home. Do not bring it. They don't really need it to do a new deal if there's some honest issue going on there. So why do they want it? They want it for the very reason they wanted it out of this guy. Poor
Right.
Greg, he doesn't have a piece of paper to work with now, and they made sure of that.
What about the extended warranty situation or the service repairs that were promised to this gentleman that just they were done too slow, too late, not done right, broken things. They delivered the thing wrong, the destination trailer wrong to him, broke some things upon the delivery. Uh, what recourse does a buyer have, Ron Burdge, when that happens? Because you signed the deal, it's yours, and all of a sudden it comes and that's when a lot of bad stuff starts happening.
Oh yeah. In fact, let's go to the very first thing when they go to deliver. And he was smart enough to realize that the road in and out and whatever was a bit of a problem. So he specifically told him how to get in without doing any damage or anything. And of course, the driver screws it up anyway, and he
Right.
breaks part of it. Okay. Well, they agreed to deliver it. They delivered it damaged. At that point, he had a right to say, okay, I'm not buying it now. I'm canceling the whole deal. But of course, most people don't know that. When you
Mm.
agree to buy something, you're buying it the way you're seeing it and the way they're representing it to be. If it's damaged when they deliver it to you, you don't have to accept that. If you do accept it, however, then you might be stuck legally any further going down the road arguing about it. So when they do a delivery like that, if they damage it on the way in, you have to decide right then, right at that moment, are you going to take it or are you going to tell them take it back? And then whatever you decide, stick with it because you just bought the farm when you made that agreement with yourself that that was what you're going to do.
It's so sad that people have to go through this, but you have to be
Yeah,
willing to stand up and say, no,
you do.
no, this is not acceptable. I am not taking it. And that's a fact, or else you can find yourself in what Greg's situation was. Now, to his benefit, I think, and he's done a lot of things right too, because Camping World has now offered to write him a check
Yeah.
to make this thing go away. But along with that check, they want him to shut up with a non disclosure agreement. And that's why he and I decided to chat before he ever signed it. What about non disclosure agreements? In this case, or generally speaking, are they all the same? Are there some nuances that you have to be careful of? Talk to me about non-disclosures because I hear a lot of it in the RV
Oh, yeah.
world now.
Yeah. They're not all the same. In fact, there's basically two breeds of non disclosure agreements. One is where it's actually written by somebody who's a lawyer who knows what he's doing, and he writes it for the reason of a proper non disclosure. Okay. And then the other one is what most dealers use. It's not really written by a lawyer who knows how to write up non disclosure agreements. It's written up by the dealer's lawyer who happens to have a law degree and figures he can write it up. The problem is that if it isn't done precise and carefully, it may have loopholes or be unenforceable completely. So just because you signed one, for instance, that doesn't mean you're stuck with one. You need to have a lawyer look at it carefully to see exactly what it says. I know a major manufacturer that had a whole lot of problems and got into a whole bunch of these non disclosure agreements. And somebody had a complaint about it, and they sent me one. And I looked at it and I thought, well, my God, this thing isn't worth a bean. I mean, it's got so many loopholes, it really isn't a non disclosure at all. And that's a good example. Just because they tell you that you can't, and just because you sign something that says that on its face, maybe, doesn't mean you really can't. You have to have a lawyer look at it who knows what these things do because they may not be enforceable, even though they're going to tell you from the factory end, oh, yeah, it's enforceable, all right, and we'll sue you if you do anything. That's just so much being a bully.
So is this? It seems like deceptive trade to me. I don't even
Yep.
know what that means. But it's just sleazy. It's deceptive. And Greg is meant to just accept it. Now here's your check, sign the documents and go away. And thank goodness for him that he's in a financial position where he doesn't have to have the money. So that's good for him. But isn't that an indication that Camping World says, hey, we know he screwed up. We want this thing to be just off the radar?
Yeah, and there's a couple of things that come to mind on that. One of them is there is a federal law that says that every consumer has a right to write an honest review of whoever they're dealing with, whatever business they're dealing with in buying goods and such. And that non disclosure agreement basically is saying you can't even do that. Well, I don't think that's enforceable at all because the federal law says you have a right to do that. And the reason you have a right to do it is specifically this kind of a thing and this kind of a dealer operation where a consumer gets ripped off or taken advantage of. So just because they say you can't doesn't mean that you can't. That's the first thing to always bear in mind with these things. There's another thing. You mentioned Deceptive. Greg bought his in Texas.
Hmm.
Texas is one of the states that's got a real good Consumer Sales Practices Act. It's called a UDAP law, or Unfair Deceptive Acts and Practices. Every state has one of these laws. And all of them are pretty good. A couple of them are stronger than others, but they're all pretty darn good. And what they fundamentally say is that no merchant can do anything that is unfair or deceptive or unconscionable to a consumer in a consumer transaction. Now, there's a similar law that actually protects businesses, but this one is specifically for consumers. So that's the first thing I thought of. And thank goodness he talked to a lawyer who knows about that law, because a lot of lawyers don't know, because it's not a law that you see a whole lot about. But that kind of a law will almost always give you economic relief. A lot of them, like Ohio and a few other states, they give you the right to actually cancel the deal if they
Hmm.
did something that was unfair to you in the process of buying something from them.
I had mentioned about Texas has got a small claims court max of twenty thousand
Yeah.
dollars, which is a lot, to that you can sue for, and which is much more than what Camping World is offering to pay this gentleman. I know this is not quote unquote legal advice, but doesn't it make sense to me to go after him in small claims court? Say, forget your non-disclosure agreement. I'm going to come after you and go for the whole kahuna, because he has lots of documentation, I think, but I mean that's his decision whether he moves forward or not. But uh, small claims, when do I decide to go to small claims court and when not? Because the truth is, Ron, our conversations, they're so in the weeds, and they're not fuzzy and popular and but man, they're so important to have, and people need to know this information, but they go blindly into these transactions, catch themselves in these
Yeah.
deals. Then they wish they would have listened to these kinds of videos. Oh, it will never happen to me. So what are your thoughts about going to small claims court in a case like this?
You can be sure that something is going to happen to you just as soon as you think to yourself, it'll never happen to me. It just seems, Murphy's Law. Now, in terms of going to small claims court, there's a place for small claims court. There always is in the legal process. And I think that basically the first thing you have to know is, what is the dollar limit you can sue for, and how much are you hurting because financially because of what happened? And are you mad enough that you want to go farther, or you would just be willing to go for that? Okay. And the small claims court has a lot of pluses to it, a lot of advantages. One of them is it's pretty quick. You can get in and out of the entire legal process in a small claims case, and you don't even need a lawyer, and you can get it accomplished one way or the other in maybe a month, maybe a little less, not likely too much, but certainly no more than two months anywhere. So it's pretty fast. The other thing is, like I said, you don't really need a lawyer. You got to know what you're doing a little bit, but not by much, because the magistrates and the judges that handle these small claims courts cases, they know they're dealing with real people and not necessarily lawyers. But then again, that also brings up another caution to it, and that is that when you sue somebody in small claims court, they can bring a lawyer. Now, you can bring one too if you like, but of course, that's going to muddy up and slow the process down and get more technical and all of that. The best thing that small claims court does, and some of them actually have the requirement of it, is they have real people. And a corporation, it's real important to know that they can never go into court without a lawyer. So if you sue a corporation and they show up and they're not a lawyer, the guy standing there talking to the judge, you need to stop him right away and tell the judge that he's not a lawyer. And that judge will then kick him out and say, you got to go get a lawyer, otherwise you cannot defend the case. Now, in small claims court, they all have a dollar limit, and it's generally somewhere around $7,500 to as much as 25,000 or so.
Mm-hmm.
10 in Texas, or even if it were higher, that'd be great. You got to look at what your situation is and then size it up. Money wise, what are you out? If that dealer wrote you a check right then, what would you want in order to feel like, okay, that's fair? Okay. If that amount is less than the small claims limit, then fine. Think real hard about going to small claims, because it will be fast. But
Mm-hmm.
when you go to small claims, you got to have your act together. And what that means is you got to have your documents that help you, and you got to be able to explain and answer the questions and the issues that you know they're going to raise. And if you sue a dealer over something you bought, no matter what the deal is, no matter what the product was, they're always going to say that you just changed your mind. Not that there's anything wrong. They'll always just say buyer's remorse, Well, buyer's remorse is just an excuse they use, but they're going to bring it up. So think about what you're going to say in response before you ever get to the courthouse. And what
And
I always
you said,
suggest is write out an outline of your situation so that you've got a bullet point list of what happened and what's wrong and how you've been hurt financially.
and you've said previously, one of the most important things that people they just don't get around to doing it. What do you want? You got to tell the judge specifically what
Oh,
you would
yeah.
like. What do you want? You're not just there to complain and bitch, but I would like $8,000, Your Honor, and here's why. You have to.
Yes. You have to be very precise about that. You got to tell them what it is you want, dollar wise. And remember, in small claims court, they can't make them buy it back. They can't give you any kind of relief other than money. So you got to know what the number is you want, and you got to know why that's the right number. And then you've got to be able to explain that to the judge too.
Okay, I want to go. We're going to wrap this thing up, but I want to go back to the non-disclosure agreements for a minute because I think I could be completely wrong, but I think that uh, that manufacturers typically will write these non-disclosure agreements. I think that they are designed to scare the hell out of the person from ever opening their mouth. And they're probably not, quote unquote, like you said, real non-disclosure agreements, but they seem like it. And then if I happen to, I sign one, but then I tell the truth, I may not disclose the amount of the settlement, but I tell the truth, and I get another nasty gram, another nasty letter from the lawyers, from the manufacturer. We're going to sue you. That's a scary, intimidating
Oh,
thing, and I
yeah.
don't want to be caught into that. So what do I do when I get an NDA? Do I contact the Burdge law firm? What do I do?
Yeah, the scariness of it, so to speak, the intention of the document is not just to bind you, but to scare you so that you don't go contrary to whatever the document is saying. Okay. And in the courts, in the legal system, there's a phrase for that. We got a word for that. It's called in terrorem. Remember the word terror? That's what the document's doing. It's trying to put you in terror of violating it. Okay. But once again, is it real? Is it binding? Or is there a way that you don't have to comply with what it is they say you can't do, which you may really want to do? You may really want to say something about it. Well, the only way that you can be halfway sure or else more than halfway sure is not to ask your brother-in-law, not to ask a friend, not to
Mm-hmm.
ask a buddy, and for God's sakes, don't believe whatever the dealer tells you.
Right.
Talk to your own lawyer. Okay, and don't just go to the guy who wrote your will. That guy writes wills. You got to talk to a contract law lawyer or a consumer law lawyer, okay, or a privacy law lawyer, one who's been in the weeds with this sort of an issue so they can read it and tell you, okay, this does or does not apply in what you're talking about. Then you know for sure. I don't mind talking with any RV owner. I never mind talking to an RV owner about their situation. I tend to look at things both from the legal and from the practical aspect of it too, which is why I really like the idea of explaining that, yeah, maybe what you can do is what you want to do in small claims court and have this over and done with. But the most important thing I think is people understanding that you got to stand up and don't just believe what you're told. And one thing I'll tell you that I heard a dealer say one time many years ago, what he said, and I've taught this stuff to other lawyers, and I've told them this is what the rule is. It's
Mm-hmm.
real simple. Nothing happens by accident at a dealer. When something happens by accident, somebody gets fired. It's all stereogrammed. It's all set up. Every step of the process. They know exactly what they're doing and how they're doing it. When somebody doesn't do it right, they get fired. Now, the other thing that came to mind out of this guy's story, he mentioned that everybody there at the dealership had changed. Well, this is Camping World.
Yeah.
Camping World's all over the place. And large dealership organizations with multi locations, when they periodically need to clean house, they don't hire new people. They just shift them over to different places and bring in new people. But the new people aren't new, they're from the old places. They just move it around, and then when you come in to complain and say, "Well, Bob did that. We fired him. He's no longer here." They won't say fired. They'll just simply say he's not with us anymore. Well, he's not
Right.
with us at this location. That's because now he's over in St. Louis, sticking it to him over there.
Oh, Ron Burdge, I'm telling you, what a crazy world this RV industry is,
It
man.
is. It truly is. If you're going to go buy an RV, for God's sakes, take some aspirin with you. You may not need it during the buying, but you might need it afterwards.
Wow, what a discussion, right? Well, I'm telling you, it's clear that situations like these are all too common, and they happen when people least expect them. The tactics we talked about today, well, they're a reminder that you got to go in prepared. Ask questions. Never give up your original paperwork without knowing exactly what's going on. Remember, as frustrating as these stories are, you do have options and resources. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a dealer try and change the deal on you after the fact? What did you experience? Drop a comment below with your story. I read every single one. And if you've been wrongfully taken advantage of and you'd like my input, don't hesitate to reach out, because you know what? That's what a good wingman's for. You can email me at rvwingman@gmail.com or call me anytime, 1330-WINGMAN. That's 1330-946-4626. Together, we can shine a light on these practices and help others avoid some of these traps. Thank you for joining me around the campfire today. Be safe, have fun, play nice, and don't leave your good manners at home. I'll see you next time.